Today for World Mental Health Day, I want to tell you a story, a true story. Something that happened to me in the last 36 hours. I was a victim of racist and misogynist behavior, and it has shocked me and it has made me stop to reflect. Coming from a relatively cosmopolitan place like London, how different that experience can be for people who look like this, who don't belong, who don't fit in with the status quo, and what impact that racism and misogyny has on one's mental health, and how frightening it is to be so powerless at the hands of a culture that has no room for one to be one's full, unvarnished self. I'm up in a corner of England which I've never been to before. It's up in the north. It's a big city. I'm really excited to come. I'm accompanying my son on a school trip. And the first thing that I experienced, which was disturbing and a little bit off, happened yesterday morning. I was at the football pitch and they were playing friendlies with a local football club. And you know how it is, as parents, you stand by the pitch and you're watching the match and you exchange pleasantries or polite glances, and maybe small talk with the other parents, whether they are on your side or the other side. And so at the end of the game, a father who had been standing alongside watching the whole match with me, he was a local parent from the other side, but he was clearly seeing how I've been behaving with my son. And my son happened to score a goal. And at the end of the match, this father, who was white, middle-aged, regularly dressed, nothing remarkable, just regular guy, smart, clearly intelligent, well-educated, by the clues that that looking at him, it seemed to say. So not someone I was expecting this kind of behavior to happen, whereby he then came over and started talking very friendlily to my son. I was impressed that he even remembered my son's name. He had obviously picked it up. He said to my son that he had been paying attention to who had been scoring the goals and complimented him on his goals. And then proceeded to ask him a very weird question, which was, are your parents Irish? And I was just standing there behind my son. Like that, he was like this and I was like that. And we were talking to the other guy and he was all this time just looking at my son and not looking at me. And I thought, whatever, at first when you start talking to a child, you engage that child. But then came these questions and I tried to interrupt to introduce myself, as his mum. And then somewhere in that split second, I realized that this body language that the other father was engaging in wasn't by accident. He was deliberately ignoring me. He was deliberately blanking me out. He was deliberately treating me as if I didn't exist. All the while, remember that for the, we might have been there for an hour plus. All during that time, we were standing side by side on the pitch. He saw me cheer. He saw me hug my son. So he jolly well knew that I was one of my son's parents. And that was the first time in a long while where I tasted firsthand what it was like to be treated as less than a human being, less than someone who was worthy of basic respect, basic eye contact. And mind you, I wasn't standing there with my arms folded like that, like giving off bad vibes or whatever. I was ready to engage. But that's the powerlessness when the silent wall goes up. So that was the first incident in the morning, which already left me a little bit bemused, sad, angry, frustrated. But I put it aside until later on, a couple of hours later, we were outside the stadium and we were there watching a pretty big women's match, one side playing the other. And so it was just really crowded and it was tough finding a parking place. And I managed to park my car in a little side road. Very grateful, so I found a spot. And then as I walked towards the stadium, I passed by a chap who was taking stuff out from his house and putting it into his car, and we were a couple of meters away from each other, and as human beings, I just checked in with his face to see whether there was any possibility of just exchanging a friendly eye contact and a bit of a brief smile, just for basic human acknowledgement. And this is what happened. He was also white, also middle-aged, also a regular guy. He saw me walking and I smiled. I was like this. You got this look, which is not, I'm not there making a big hoo-ha out of it. It was just eye contact and looking forward to, a little smile. And so I did that to him. I was like, and this is what he did back to me. Now, I don't know how that gaze came across to you, but the feeling that shook me from bottom to top, and which still makes me tremble a little now recording this, was fear. Rejection. Based on what? Based on who I am on the inside? Based on what I have to offer the world? Based on my quality of character? No, and no. Did this guy know anything about me other than the quick, judgment of who's this person? And I'll tell you one thing, if even animals can sense body language, we human beings sure as heck can pick up cues as to when we are not welcome, as to when we are seen as unwanted, undesirable. And that look that he gave me, and he held it, and he stared at me that way, told me, you don't belong here. We don't want your lot around here. We don't want you around here. I don't know. I couldn't even have an exchange of personal experiences with this chap. So that was the second incident, a couple of hours after the first one. When I came back after watching the football match, which was great, thrilling actually, and it was a wonderful experience. And then, the boys filed back into the school coach, and I headed back towards my car. And I found to my dismay that I'd made the mistake of parking in what was actually a private lane, because the gates that were open had now been closed and locked. Now, my mistake, okay? I mean, there was no signage up there, but perhaps I should have known better than to park in a road with a gate in it, no matter that it was open. Fair enough, that's my problem. There was desperation because there was just nowhere else to park, because it was so overflowing. There was time that was needing to be with my son. So I take full responsibility for that decision. But guys, I'm a cross-cultural coach. I train people in culture shock. I train people in visceral reactions. I help people build up their sense of confidence over who they are and what they have to offer, and to learn to anchor that with meditation and mindfulness techniques, how to not give your power away to others, how to stand firm in your ground and to take up space. And so if even someone like me, who has the benefit of a background in psychology and studied, in a great university and blah, 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 and all of that, I watched myself turn in a mere span of hours from somebody who is so sure of herself, who has such a great track record for making amazing things happen and really building people up, myself included. It didn't matter. In those couple of hours, I experienced firsthand what happened to my mental health when I was one against the tide, when I was one person, powerless against a silent wall that had gone up, and I couldn't even feel it out where, but it was there. And it's scary when you can't do anything about it. My car was trapped behind that gate. And in theory, what one needs to do is very simple, right? Go knock on the door. There were at least 12, maybe 15, 16 houses, which looked as if they backed onto that little lane, so I could, in theory, take my pick. And this is something that you find very often with people coping with or trying to come to terms with phenomena like racism, like bigotry, like misogyny, sexism, ableism, ageism, etc. Denial. What we at LPI, the company we run, Living Potential International, what we call cognitive behavioral dissonance, which means you say one thing and you behave another. And there's a lot of virtue signaling. And the irony of that was during the match itself, there was a Black Lives Matter banner nicely displayed there. During the match itself, they had a little strip down below, and there was one strip that, because they keep changing content, there was one strip there which said, this football club is against racism, and if you spot any racism, call this number. Who do I call? How do I report something like this? Now happening in London, there's a whole hoo-ha going down at the moment about the aftermath of the femicides, the abduction, rapes and murders of Sabina Nasser and my neighbour, Sarah Everard, whom I don't know, but we live in the same neighbourhood in London. And there is wrath, rightly so, for the kind of initiatives and ideas that are being proposed for how to solve this problem. Oh yeah, just have an app, report the problem. Well, let's just stop and put yourself in my shoes. How do you report something like this? How do you, what happens? Do I go to the app and say, oh, I was walking by this random guy and he just gave me the evil eye? Right. Is it going to make a difference? What do I expect to happen? The authorities just go and march up and come and ask me questions and ask me to describe exactly what kind of look he gave me. I mean, it's not feasible. It doesn't work. These ideas can be sometimes helpful, but very often they can also be window dressing. Very often they are just virtue signaling. Very often they're just cosmetic tweaks to give the impression that something is being done when actually nothing is changing that needs to be changed. And that was the experience I felt when I was trembling. I was trembling when I walked up to the first door, which was right next to the gates, mind you. I mean, right next to the gates. I pressed on the doorbell and I stood there, my heart thumping. And this middle-aged white lady slowly opens the door and she looks at me like this. Not kidding you. She looks at me like this and says, and just doesn't say anything actually, and I apologized. I said, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm not from these parts and I made a mistake of parking my car behind the gates. Would you be able to help me open the gate, please? And she looked at me, stutter, and her response to me was to do this. No. That's exactly what she did. She looked at me, stared at me, held me in the gaze, shook her head, deliberately taking pleasure in refusing me the help that I needed, and deliberately enjoying watching me suffer, desperate, not sure how I was going to get myself out of this. And so I didn't know what to do. And I asked her, so what should I do now? And then she made some general comment about trying the guy next door. And that was it. There's nothing I could do. Eventually, I knocked on the other doors. But let me tell you one thing. 3 little incidents that happened in a span of maybe 3 to 4 hours. And what happened to my mental health during that time? It leached out of me. My sense of confidence, my sense of empowerment, my sense that I could actually have an impact on the outcome was replaced by powerlessness, fear, trepidation, uncertainty, disorientation, and I was completely vulnerable at that moment to the vagaries of the situation, whether someone was going to be kind enough or not to take pity on me and to help me out of that situation. Fortunately, the third door that I knocked, the dad came out. There was a little girl in the window, so I waved at her and I smiled and she waved back, which is helpful. So he finally came out and understood my predicament and had no issue letting me out, and I thanked him. But you know what happened when I pressed on the second door? My reality had already changed at that point. As I rang on the doorbell and I stood back, already having been so cruelly rejected the first time, I found the thoughts going through my head something along the lines of, what if this person doesn't open a door? What if they all don't open a door? What am I going to do? What can I do? Nothing. Didn't have the key. And when nobody came to answer the second doorbell I rang, the thoughts that went through my head were, are they not opening the door because nobody's at home? Or because they look through the glass and they see this person and they're choosing not to open the door? Now, I'll never have an answer to the question. But this is also what we call at LPI institutional gaslighting. Now, gaslighting is behavior that is engaged in to result in another person doubting their grip on reality. Gaslighting is an everyday experience for those of us who are minorities, and I'm female, and I'm Chinese. I have an accent. I count as a minority, as a non-status quo on several counts. And when you have situations like these, one of the key things for us to think about when we think about the relationship between mental health and the ability to perform or not, the environment that is supportive or not, I realized when I thought soberly back on this experience, I couldn't win, you know. I was pretty, decently dressed. I had a beige jacket on, I had a jumper, slacks, trainers. So I wasn't a slouch, and people can dislike me because I'm smartly dressed, because I'm well dressed. And so therefore we turn that on its head and ask ourselves, well, if Elaine showed up in a slouchy tracksuit or whatever, like all disheveled and whatever, would that have helped? No. Would those people have treated me any differently? No. I couldn't have won. No matter what I would have done to myself in that moment, there was nothing I could do. And that's what it's like to be marginalized. That's what it feels like to be discriminated against. It is powerless, and there is very much a power dynamic going on, that the other side is suffering for whatever reason, or one can write a long list of reasons why one human being can choose to act this way towards another, or find it natural, societally acceptable, even pleasurable to inflict that kind of violence, emotional, physical violence, not just coming to blows, but exclusion, negation, ignorance, denial, the sheer denial, minimization. Oh yeah, Elaine, it's not a big deal. How many of us watching this can resonate with that? And what does it do to our mental health? What becomes normal anymore? What do we internalize? When I was up at Oxford, I had to read my essays out. And people sometimes ask me, Elaine, where did you pick up your British accent from? I picked it up because I had to. Because I found that when I was reading my essays out in the tutorials, my classmates and my tutor were not able to understand me when I have my very heavy Singaporean accent on. And when I've shared this story with a few close friends and was met by the same outrage and horror and sadly a chorus of similar experiences, I realized just how common this experience is, and that's what's prompting me to go on camera today and share this story for everyone, because it's unsafe, it's scary to be at the receiving end of institutional gaslighting, and it is not something that sees the light of day very often, because it doesn't often come from allies from within the status quo. It doesn't very often come from, dare I say, even folks like myself who have been so fortunate to have had an educational and a work background, which gives me, kind of that backing up. Big names whom I've worked with, it gives you that credibility. What would have happened in that situation if I was wearing a hijab? What would have happened in that situation if I was a black male? And so this experience was a wake-up call. It was only just one day. But recording this, I am so well aware that this feeling of exclusion, denial, contempt, minimization, negation, violence is an everyday reality for millions of our fellow human beings all around the world. And it is largely silent, because when you are in that state of powerlessness, you begin to even doubt your own voice. And you begin to doubt your own voice for several reasons, not just because of the gaslighting, and not because you end up normalizing this sickness, this unfairness, this injustice, and you start to turn inward sometimes and to say, maybe it's my fault, maybe I did something wrong. That's a pretty common response there too. So I share this story today to highlight that mental health is under threat for us minorities every single day. And what's it going to take for this to shift in a substantial, meaningful way, a timely way, an immediate way? It's going to take us sharing our stories, I think, just like this. Whether you want to leave some comments below, or tell the story onward, or tell your own stories, or listen to others share theirs and take those seriously. One of the comments that I received from my white friends in response to my sharing of this story in my private social media was, Elaine, thank you for bringing this to our attention, because what you've explained or what you've described is a state of being that we have never experienced, being white. Now, of course, whiteness is just one aspect of the status quo. Where I'm from, in Singapore, is the opposite. As a Chinese Singaporean, we are the majority. So let me make this absolutely clear. This is not an anti-white message, for God's sake. It's not an anti one particular population or constituency. Bigotry, hatred, group behavior, toxic tribal behavior, that crops up everywhere. Destructive personal attitudes that feed one's sense of self-worth at the expense of another, also known as bullying, intimidation, marginalization. Those cut across the spectrum. So I want to make it absolutely clear that this is a problem for all of us, and this is a solution that cannot be brought about by any one individual alone. It takes group strength to push against the tide. And so my hope is that in listening to this, you can start connecting the dots, feeling perhaps a similar sense of sick familiarity, maybe powerlessness, outrage, anger, conviction to make this right. And my hope is that that might lead us to join forces to bring about what I believe is a wholesale revolution. And I know I'm not the only one feeling that way. A wholesale revolution that is so badly needed in order to set things right. How? To bring about a daily living where we can all wake up every morning in a world where we don't have to fear for our mental health anymore. Happy World Mental Health Day.